Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the session before happy hour. Bear with us. We've got a good program here today that's going to get you teed up. Anybody with questions, you can submit your questions on the app, but we are also going to have a live mic. I only ask that when you raise your hand, wait until the microphone comes to you. First raise your hand, then wait for the mic, and then when the mic is there, you can ask the question and try to keep it concise. And I appreciate it. I'm George Platt. I am the general counsel for and one of the principals of the Wetlands Bank Company. This company's been around since the early 90s. David John, who I saw earlier today, is one of the founders of the company as well. We have been evolving over the years. We were the first mitigation bank in the United States to transfer a private mitigation bank core credit. And it shows you, and that was in like 1995. So it kind of shows you how far we've come. You're going to hear today about how many wetlands mitigation banks and habitat conservation banks and in-lieu fee programs there are around the country. It's pretty amazing the growth that we've seen. And of course, given the extraordinary growth of the development industry, both for residential and commercial as well as infrastructure, there's going to be a tremendous demand. I know in South Florida right now, we can't generate enough credits to meet the needs. So this is an industry that ought to be moving up and moving out. And you're going to hear today about some of the trials and tribulations we have of trying to make sure that we can have what I would call consistent, efficient, and effective and timely mitigation banks to be able to provide those credits to those who need them. While the two speakers are going to be speaking on things that are different, there is a common theme here, and we really want you to feel free to kind of shoot questions at them when you're done. We are blessed with several highly qualified speakers here today, and I want to take a minute to introduce them and thank them for being here. We have Roy Gardner and Aaron Okeno, and then we have Andy Bodet from the Corps. Andy will focus his presentation on the Corps report on its internal audit of how well the Corps districts are doing in terms of their compliance with the requirements of the rule. Roy and Aaron will present their extensive research on the long-term protections of compensatory mitigation sites, along with an analysis of equivalency across the different providers. And you note in the title, they put a question mark after that, which means they're going to say something controversial, I'm sure. Let me just give a brief introduction of these folks. Andy Bodet is the program manager of the regulatory program for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in Washington, D.C. He's worked in the Civil Works program of the Corps since 2007. His career includes experience working at the district level on permittee responsible mitigation and mitigation bank reviews in Minnesota and Maryland, and as a regulator evaluating permit applications associated primarily with commercial, industrial, residential, and transportation projects. Mr. Bodet has worked at the Corps headquarters for 2 years, providing guidance and direction to districts and divisions and division regulators across the nation in developing policy guidance and leading rulemaking activity specific to the issues regulated by the Corps under 404 of the Clean Water Act and Section 10 of the River and Harbors Act. In addition to being the point person for mitigation at Corps headquarters, Mr. Bodet is also the point of contact for 401 water quality certification and regulatory national SOP. So he cuts across a lot of areas that are definitely of interest to us. Roy Gardner, who I have known, I think since he was a boy, but he is professor of law and director of the Institute for Biodiversity, Law and Policy at Stetson University College of Law. And I first met Roy when he was just coming off working for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, or the U.S. Army, where he first worked on the no net loss when it first came out way back in 1990. So he's been involved in this business for a long time. After serving in the Pentagon as the Department of Army's principal wetland attorney, he joined the Stetson Law Faculty in '94. He was a member of the National Research Council Committee that produced the 2001 report that was, in fact, the impetus for the 2008 compensatory mitigation rule. And we've worked with Roy many times over the years on many, many projects, and he is one of the godfathers of the mitigation banking industry, in my opinion. Internationally, Professor Gardner has served as chair of the Scientific and Technical Review Panel of the Ramsar Convention on Wetlands from 2013 to 2018. He has spoken at the United Nations and testified before a World Bank arbitration panel on wetlands issues. He has co-authored amicus briefs in front of the Supreme Court on wetlands issues and WOTUS-related issues. His research and scholarship focus on U.S. and international wetland legal policies, and he is the author of Lawyers, Swamps, and Money, the U.S. Wetland Law, Policy and Politics. And he's also a lead author of the Global Wetland Outlook, the Ramsar Convention flagship. With him is Professor Aaron Okeno from the University of Miami School of Law, and assisting him on putting this research together also is Catherine Pratt from Stetson University College of Law. And I'd like to bring Andy up to make his initial presentation. I would ask that you hold your questions until both the speakers have finished, and then we're going to kind of open it wide up and hopefully have a good dialogue. Thank you.
Thanks, George. Is this on? Can you hear me now? I think we should start off by thanking Kim, Aaron, Victor, and John, as well as Carlene. It's a Herculean effort to pull this event off, and seeing all the faces that came here, and it's going off pretty much without a hitch, so let's give them a quick round of applause. I really appreciate the fact that I'm in way over my head here after hearing that introduction. I graduated high school in 1995 when George was busy transferring the first credit ever, so that's pretty impressive. I'm humbled with everyone I meet here, and it's a great opportunity, and as well as being able to put this together with Roy, the Godfather, so I appreciate that. We can jump into it here. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jennifer Moyer. And today we'll be discussing the internal audit the Corps did as far as our application of the compensatory mitigation preference hierarchy. It's apparent that you figured me out already. I'm not Jennifer Moyer. We're giving you the exact same presentation that we gave to the congressional staffers back in December, so that's why you got the date and Jennifer on there. My name is actually Andy Bodet, just like Tom Bodet with Motel 6, and yes, we'll leave the light on for you. So now that we've got that straightened out, in last year's appropriation, there was additional funding approved to ensure the timely processing of shellfish aquaculture and permitting activities. Attached to that appropriations bill was a supposition that the Corps may not be consistent in its implementation of the 2008 compensatory mitigation rule. The manager's statement went on to state that particular districts have failed to adhere to the mitigation hierarchy in the rule as it pertains to the preference for mitigation bank credits. And it reminded us that limited deviation from the hierarchy must be based on scientific and technical analysis and documented accordingly. And it ended with a do-out. The Corps shall brief Congress on steps taken to ensure proper and consistent application of the rule across the districts. So Congress gives us funding. It's only fair that they can ask us if we're actually doing what we say we're doing. So we went on a fact-finding mission to see how well we were adhering to the mitigation hierarchy. The bottom line, the Corps is correctly applying the compensatory mitigation preference hierarchy in accordance with the 2008 mitigation rule 86% of the time. Clarification here, that does not mean that banks were used 86% of the time that the Corps required compensatory mitigation. It means that the Corps when we required mitigation, 86% of the time, we correctly followed the preference hierarchy. So that's a big distinction to make there. 10% of the time, the documentation was inconclusive. That's the blue slice, and the red slice is 4% of the time we found out that we were not in compliance with the 2008 mitigation rule. So that 10%, maybe we followed it, maybe we didn't. We don't know. To set the stage for the rest of our conversation, we wanted to briefly cover what the 2008 compensatory mitigation rule states. We have a preferred order when reviewing projects, and that's with bank credits first, in-lieu fee credits second, and permittee responsible mitigation third. We've established the preference for mitigation bank credits because they have a higher likelihood of ecological success, and they must achieve the appropriate milestones in order to have the credits approved and available to sell. And the second half there, the compensatory mitigation must be available, practicable, taking into consideration cost, logistics, and existing technology, and it also must be capable of compensating for the aquatic resource functions that will be lost as a result of the permitted activity. This is a slide from RIBITS, our regulatory in-lieu fee bank tracking system. It's a pretty sweet acronym. The green dots represent active mitigation banks and in-lieu fee sites. The yellow dots represent pending mitigation sites and in-lieu fee sites. And the red dots represent sites that are sold out of credits. So this snapshot, you can see if you focus on the right, up and down the East Coast, we're densely populated. As you go west towards the Mississippi Valley, we've still got good coverage, and then west of there, it gets pretty sparse until you hit the West Coast again. So this just gives you a quick snapshot, 10,000 foot elevation, that credits may not always be available to offset functional losses due to our permitted activities. Initially, we reviewed our ORM database. It's a different database than RIBITS. ORM is our permitting side of things, to identify permit decisions that required compensatory mitigation. And this data shows that mitigation bank credits were determined to be environmentally preferred in the majority of USACE permits. Our ORM data cannot address whether or not we were consistent or inconsistent with the rule, as it does not reflect what type of compensatory mitigation credits were available at the time of the permit decision. We are improving our database reporting features to provide more clarity as that came to light during this review. Looking at this graph, this is from our ORM database. You can see the calendar years along the bottom, 2010 to 2020, and the percentage of authorizations vertically along the y-axis. The green line represents the percentage of authorizations where the compensatory mitigation came from banks. And you can see how that number has risen from 30% in 2010 up to 60% in 2020. While the use of PRM on-site, illustrated by the blue line, has decreased from 50%, 50, to 15, over the last decade. While in-lieu fee credits and PRM off-site have both remained between 10 and 20% over that same time frame. There have been two additional studies that kind of hammer home what we're talking about today. The Stevenson and Tutko in 2018 found that USACE correctly adhered to the mitigation preference hierarchy, and the Institute for Water Resources, IWR, in 2015 indicated that the Corps is using mitigation bank credits to fulfill compensatory mitigation requirements when the appropriate type and amount of credits are available. So we're only able to glean so much information from our databases, the raw data. To fully address Congress's request, we needed to dive into our decision documents. So we're going to discuss the effort to prepare for this briefing. We collected data on sample sets of permit decisions from all 38 districts for fiscal years 2018, 19, and 20. We also collected information for training, existing guidance that mentions the mitigation hierarchy, and on existing quality control measures that are already in place. Based on our review of those permit decisions over the last 3 fiscal years, 86% of our decisions were found to have applied the hierarchy consistent with the rule. This means that staff either accepted the first type of mitigation available in the hierarchy or appropriately justified selecting another type of compensatory mitigation. 4% of the projects were not compliant with the mitigation rule, and 10% we couldn't tell by our own documentation. And later in this briefing, we're going to discuss efforts to improve our application of the mitigation rule, focusing on the 10 and 4%. Over the same 3 fiscal years, we reviewed permit decisions. The majority of districts have sent field staff to some form of training which spoke to application of the mitigation rule. Field staff attended 74 trainings in various regions across the nation, which represents 89% of our districts sending staff to training for the mitigation rule. The other 11% did not send staff to mitigation training. 54 staff have participated in headquarters developed training, online modules that we have, and that number is included in the 74 up above. So this includes headquarters developed trainings for new and seasoned regulators, as well as attendance at other regional and national mitigation conferences like this. When we reviewed the district and division level guidance, as far as implementation of the rule, we found that about half of the districts had developed local guidance since the rule was finalized in 2008. And some of that guidance would benefit from updates to better reflect how we have grown and improved our understanding of the mitigation rule. The next few slides here, we're going to cover maintaining compliance with the rule, as the manager's statement had the call to action to brief them on steps taken to ensure consistent application of the rule across all our districts. So in order to continue to develop and improve training for new and existing staff, we have the core regulatory development training program, the RDP, which currently offers basic and advanced training modules that expand on application of the rule and the documenting of our permit decisions. We are increasing our training modules to include a new one on how to implement the mitigation rule and mitigation preference hierarchy. We expect to roll that out this year. The advantage of the RDP modules is that they can be taken by any PM, regardless of years of experience, and they can be taken from anywhere at any time. We also have regional specific mitigation courses. We have 2 of them that we're hosting this year. And we continue to expand our district-led trainings on the mitigation rule, and as well as our documentation of permit decisions. Our decision document templates are developed by headquarters for use by our districts. These decision documents ensure that the districts are including the minimum level of documentation required for our affirmative individual permit decisions as well as our general permit decisions. Most recently, we updated our decision documents last summer, and that included updating the section for compensatory mitigation. Our templates assist with documenting the reasoning and decision-making process on permits, and to try to ensure consistent, transparent, and appropriate documentation in our administrative records. We have decision documents for individual permits, which combine our NEPA analysis along with other elements which we base our decision on. We also have decision documents for general permits. Those verify that the activity complies with the terms and conditions of a general permit. Both templates consider the application of the mitigation preference hierarchy and require rationale from deviating from it. We work with our divisions and districts to update local guidance to better reflect the requirements of the mitigation rule, including the mitigation preference hierarchy, and we remove some outdated guidance from district websites. Division districts and headquarters will continue quality control processes to ensure consistent application of the mitigation rule, as well as documenting our permit decisions. This slide hits on communication. On the left side of the screen, you can see that internally we have twice monthly calls with our headquarters, our division, and our district chiefs. We also have separate monthly calls with our headquarters and division chiefs. In these meetings, we discuss implementation of the regulatory program, including addressing any inconsistent application of regulations and improving documentations of our permit decisions. On the right side of our screen, you can see our external communications. We have annual fly-ins and the mitigation conferences that we attend. That includes folks from headquarters, the mitigation bank industry. We also have a bunch of folks here from our field sites, which is good to see. And upon request, headquarters can meet with individual stakeholders as well as the banking industries. As far as communication goes, I'll be initiating mitigation roundtables with the mitigation SMEs from all of our 38 districts, where we intend to discuss implementation of the mitigation rule, including best practices, recommendations, or any concerns. To maintain compliance with the rule, we'll conduct a similar review of permit decisions in 2 to 3 years that will ensure that compliance with the mitigation rule is maintained or improved, and also identify any improvements to training, guidance, and documents to ensure consistency in our application of the rule. In summary, the Corps is correctly applying the compensatory mitigation hierarchy in accordance with the rule. And in order to maintain that compliance and improve it, headquarters is going to continue to communicate frequently with the districts and divisions, as well as mitigation bank industries, to improve our compensatory mitigation decisions through ongoing training, updates to decision documents, and updates to guidance. Again, we're going to conduct a similar review in 2 to 3 years to ensure that compliance with the mitigation rule is maintained or improved, and to identify training, guidance, and documentation that need to be updated. Thanks, George.
Thank you, Andy. Roy?
Hey, good afternoon. Can you hear me in the back? We good? All right, excellent, excellent. Thank you, George, for the kind introduction. A lengthy introduction only means that I'm old. I'd like to introduce Aaron Okeno a little bit more. Aaron graduated first in her class from Stetson Law School, went out to work for a law firm for a while before we brought her back into Stetson, where she worked in the Biodiversity Institute for many years before departing to be a professor at Miami Law. And she's worked on those amicus briefs involving WOTUS that George mentioned, and also many of you know her from her presentations here at this conference, typically involving in-lieu fees, and she'll be talking a little bit about that during our presentation. We're going to switch back and forth. So it's thank you to Carlene and everybody who organizes this conference. This is a fantastic conference, and it is great to see old friends and meet some new folks here and in Idaho. I assume that you picked Idaho because of Sackett and Priest Lake being only 500 miles away. But I'll talk about Sackett tomorrow. But today we're going to talk about something different. And thank you, Andy, for your very interesting presentation. It's always good to see the data. And we're going to provide a little bit of data as well in the context of long-term protection of compensatory mitigation sites. So our team at Stetson, Aaron, Catherine Pratt, who's our biodiversity fellow in the Institute, a host of Stetson Law students, and myself have been working on this project for almost 3 years now. So it's great to be able to share some of our initial findings. I hope to share some of it. Hey, there we go. Okay, hopefully it just advances one. Okay, so the project is actually sponsored by the Joy McCann Foundation, and their interest in this is solely focused on water quality. They want to try to influence policy in a positive way to enhance water quality. And so what we have done is we've conducted a nationwide review of permittee responsible mitigation, in-lieu fee, and mitigation bank documents, focusing specifically on site protection instruments and long-term financial mechanisms. With respect to the PRM aspect, the permittee responsible mitigation aspect, I think we're among the first to collect and analyze the data, at least in the context of long-term protections. The mitigation bank and in-lieu fee information, as you know, much of it is on rivets, but PRM is not, and so to the public, that's a bit of a black box. So we're taking a look at a range of practices, those that are required by the regulations, but also what the practices are that perhaps go beyond what the regulations require. Ultimately, we'll be making recommendations on best practices, and so today we're focusing on the preliminary results.
All right. Thank you, Roy. And can you all hear me in the back? All right. Thank you all for being here. Also, again, big thanks to Kat Pratt for her help with this project. It's a labor of love for all of us. I'd also like to thank our expert review panel and the core districts and in-lieu fee programs and mitigation banks that have provided information and documents to us along the way. So, starting with the black box with permittee responsible mitigation, the Ecological Restoration Business Association, ERBA, had previously submitted a Freedom of Information Act FOIA request to obtain a nationwide list of permit information for fiscal years 2017 and 2018. ERBA kindly shared the spreadsheets with us for this project. And we used those spreadsheets to determine the universe of permits that we would review. We used several filters. The initial filters were filtering just for standard permits, and for those standard permits where compensatory mitigation was required. After applying a few other filters, we ended up with a universe of around 540 standard permits with permittee responsible mitigation. During our pilot phase, we focused on the Jacksonville district and a subset of documents from the Jacksonville district to try to figure out what it is we were looking at, see if we needed to make any adjustments before we moved into the primary phase. To obtain the rest of the documents that we needed for the primary phase of the project, we submitted numerous FOIA requests to 37 districts. We randomly selected permits from within each district, and the number of permits that we selected within each district varied depending on the number of permits within that district that met our filters, our selection criteria. After we randomly selected the subset of permits that we hoped to review, we made FOIA requests for documents related to 316 permits, and we specifically requested the permit and any exhibits or attachments, the mitigation plan along with any long-term management plan and or provisions related to long-term management, the recorded site protection instrument, and any documentation, if it was available separately, that helped establish the long-term financial mechanism. Understandably, the response to our FOIA requests were delayed a bit initially because of the pandemic, but in the end and overall, the response was very good. We now have received PRM documents from 35 districts related to 270 permits, which ended up being about half of our initial universe of permits. I will note that one district, despite multiple requests and follow-ups, has never acknowledged our FOIA request or responded to it, but overall, very good response. And in some instances, we found that our FOIA requests led, or maybe nudged, some of the districts to update the documents that were available on Ribbits. So that was sort of a positive aspect of the process as well.
So turning to the PRM data, we had a good mix of different types of permittees, slightly more private permittees than public permittees. And there was also a range of different mitigation types. So 44% wetland mitigation only, 20% of stream mitigation only, 23% a combination of wetland and stream, and then the other category includes seagrass, removal of docks and piers, oyster bed projects. So now we turn to the summary of our findings for PRM, and so this is just a subset of some of the things we've been looking at. One of the pieces was whether the documents indicated that a site protection instrument was required, and we found that it was in 73% of the cases, or in 73% of the permits that we were taking a look at. For the other 27%, about 3/4 of the mitigation projects were on public lands. So that might explain why site protection instruments were not required. With respect to whether a long-term steward was identified, almost 70% of the permit documents indicated that a steward was identified. There's a bit of a dip, however, when we take a look at whether there's actually a long-term management plan. So we specifically requested this in the FOIA documents, but only slightly more than half actually had long-term management plans. We see a further dip when we get into long-term financial mechanisms. And so the 21% of the permit documentation referenced a long-term financial mechanism. So it means that it's contemplated. We also then dug a little deeper to see if there were more specifics, more details beyond a mere statement. And only 7% of these PRM specified an initial funding amount, and only 6% itemized long-term management costs. So in the PRM context, it appears that not much is being required regarding long-term financial mechanisms, or at least there's not much specificity regarding these mechanisms.
All right, turning to the in-lieu fee programs, our universe for this category ended up being 65 programs and approximately 50 projects or sites. We started with Ribbits to determine our universe, and we filtered to look at all approved programs that had been approved as of September 30th, 2019. Not all programs, not all in-lieu fee programs, though, have approved sites or projects. So we started by reviewing the broader program level documentation for all of the programs. But for those programs that did have approved or even sold out sites, we then randomly selected 1 to 2 sites per program and requested and reviewed site-specific documents for those as well. We started with Ribbits. A lot, of course, of the ILF information is available on Ribbits, and we also made some direct requests to in-lieu fee programs to give us additional information or documents. And then to sort of round things out, we made FOIA requests to 23 districts to get the other documents that we were looking for. And we received, again, good responses. We've heard from 22 districts so far. As an aside, the screenshots on the right are from an article and one of the guides that we produced through a grant project that was led by Dr. Rebecca Kisslinger and the Environmental Law Institute. We worked with them to produce a series of 4 guides that focused on some of the challenges faced by in-lieu fee programs, specifically looking at full cost accounting, long-term management, programmatic audits, and then project approval and the 3-year growing season. And those are all available online if you haven't seen those and you'd like to learn a little bit more about those in the ILF space. Starting first with the ILF program level documentation, so starting broad. Based on the program level documents, we found 95% indicated that a site protection instrument would be required. 83% identified a long-term steward. About 2/3 have a long-term management plan. Also, a little more than 2/3 reference a long-term financial mechanism, and then a big dip, but a dip that makes sense. None specified initial funding amount and only 2% itemized long-term management costs. But this makes sense in the context of in-lieu fee programs when you're talking about the program level documents, because the program instrument and the related documents are just setting up, for the most part, the program at a fairly high level, broad level. So that sort of site-specific detail, we didn't really expect to see that in those documents. But When we switched and looked at the site-specific documents, we did find more detail there, and I'll show that on this next slide. So this slide focuses on the project site-specific documentation. 92% required a site protection instrument, 96% identified a long-term steward, 90% had a long-term management plan, 80% referenced a long-term financial mechanism, and then looking at these last two categories, more information here, almost a half, 44%, specified initial funding amount, and about a quarter itemized long-term management costs. I did also want to note, as Roy did, that these categories are not the only categories of information, of data that we have, and we hope to give some additional detail when we publish our report online.
So turning to mitigation banks, we used Ribbits to determine the universe. We were considering banks approved between January 1st, 2010 and September 30th, 2019. We randomly selected a certain number from each district depending on the number approved in that district. We took a look at what was available on Ribbits. Some banks also provided some documents to us, and we also submitted more FOIA requests to 35 districts. And thus far, we have received responses from 31 districts, although we do note that one district actually redacted all of the data involving the long-term financial mechanism. So it was sort of an interesting, Vicksburg. It was an interesting, it was an interesting exercise to sort of see how the different districts viewed the FOIA exemptions. In terms of the findings, 98% of the banks that we've taken a look at so far, and so this is I think 155 banks. I think we're taking a look at 159 sites. 98% require a site protection easement. 81% have identified a long-term steward. 96% has a long-term management plan. In terms of referencing a long-term financial mechanism, 80%. And then digging down, looking for more specificity in the documents that we've received, 56% actually specify an initial funding amount for that long-term financial mechanism, and about a third also in the documents itemize the long-term management costs. So let's take a look at how they all compare. And try to answer the question whether different types of mitigation providers are being held to equivalent standards. I think if you take a look at the in-lieu fee, at least with respect to in-lieu fee sites and mitigation banks, the answer is yes. With PRM, permittee responsible mitigation, no, at least with respect to long-term management plans and long-term financial mechanisms. They do not be, permittee responsible mitigation appears not to be held to equivalent standards. So our next steps is that we're going to review and analyze the additional FOIA responses that we look forward to. And then we're also going to provide the core districts an opportunity to review our interpretations and findings. So we're going to not that the core districts are looking for more work, but we're going to at least give them the opportunity to say, this is how we're interpreting the documents that we've received, and to see if there's anything that they think should be corrected. We'll also consult with in-lieu fee programs and mitigation banks as necessary, and ultimately we'll be publishing our findings. Eventually we'll publish it in a legal journal, but we're going to get it up more immediately as a working paper on SSRN, the Social Science Research Network, so it will be publicly available there. and we look forward to your questions and the discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys. I'm going to start out with a question to Andy, and then anybody that's got a question for either one of our speakers, feel free to raise your hand, and the microphone will come to you. Again, Andy, it goes like this. We know that bank and ILF review times range from 3 to 5 years, and sometimes even longer, and we can probably all tell war stories about that. The IRT was identified by IRBA and others who have looked at this as the biggest bottleneck. There was some discussion about actually removing the IRT from the process in order to try to make the process more consistent with the rule. Your presentation mentioned some steps that the Corps and you are taking to implement and improve the process, but what else can be done to cut the review times? And in your answer, if you can, I noticed you were copied on the IRBA letter that went to Deputy Assistant Secretary Pinkham with their recommendations for a regulatory guidance letter that would set forth some more perhaps rigorous guidance in order to make sure that happens. But I would appreciate your thoughts both on other things that you believe the Corps can do and whether or not a regal might be at least helpful in the process.
Yeah, it's a fantastic question. You are correct that the amendment to remove the IRT, I don't know if it's in the garbage, it's probably on the shelf. It falls behind the Waters Rule, NEPA, 401 Water Quality Certification, Tribal, Environmental Justice, Climate Change, everything this administration is focusing on. So that got pushed to the back. So even though that occurred, sure, that's fine. The administration gets to do what they want. I think a big thing that we can do at the Corps is empower our project managers to make decisions. Per the rule, the Corps is the chair of the IRT. There can be co-chairs if there's endangered species or a state level approval is needed. So the chairs or chair need to drive the process. The process is set up to solicit comments from the IRT as well as the general public and make the decision to move on. The rule talks about consensus-based approach. Nowhere in there does it say that consensus is required. So we can't be held up by that. In addition to empowering our PMs through training and knowing that leadership and headquarters has their back, last year, maybe several of you remember that we heard from Mr. Woodley on the 10 Commandments, and there were 10 Commandments, but the overarching theme of them was communication and following the process. It's a process. It's a great rule. It's doing great things. We're all learning as we go. But it is a process, and consensus isn't going to be achieved all the time. We can go out and try to delineate a wetland or identify an ordinary high water mark, and we may not get consensus on that either. So we need to make decisions and roll out and keep the process going. Wasn't my doing, but we had 2 workshops earlier this week. EPA had grant money, and they contracted out with Steve Martin and Aaron Auer and put together workbooks and checklists, and that we had great feedback on that the sponsors felt that they could use it to attach to their submittals, and they could identify where everything is and what page, so that the reviewers can go and look at the pages instead of having to try to sift through a multi-100-page document. And the regulators in the room also felt that it'd be good to improve communication amongst the IRT because they could all be looking at the same checklist and talking through it. And that would also help with one of the other 10 commandments last year was stay in your lane. So if somebody has stream expertise, they can comment on streams. If somebody has financial assurance expertise, they can focus on that. And the IRT can work together more as a team instead of everybody trying to be the great utility player and know it all, and we get 6 different opinions to try to work through. The regal discussion, You mentioned URBA's letter to Mr. Pinkham. We've had discussions with the bank industries, and we appreciate that letter. The concept there is fairly similar, that it would reaffirm the roles on the IRT and encourage discipline in adhering to the timelines. We all want the same thing. We want to get through the process. Whether it's yes or no, you guys want answers. You can cut bait and move on to something else. But the communication needs to be clear, concise, direct, and professional. So we are discussing the potential for a regal to that manner. We also had a good discussion today in the regulators forum, and there they mentioned that multi-use banks, whether it's endangered species or whatever the multi-use is, there's some confusion at districts on how to get that going, and if it's taken us 3 to 5 years to do a simple 404 bank, and you throw species in there, it's not making things go quicker. So there are some interesting success stories on how they've successfully done that and made multi-use banks come to fruition. And there's also some frustration with lack of guidance from the headquarters levels across all the agencies. So that was another topic that came up as maybe an interagency regal to help with conservation banks and provide some direction there. If you take a step down from developing regals, we can send out information and process documents to our field staff, and that doesn't require interagency review or OMB review. So that's another option for us to get something out to our field quicker, as far as reaffirming that they're the chair of the IRT and keep things moving. So we can have a kind of a multi-pronged approach on getting out some information level stuff to our project managers, and then simultaneously working on a regal at the same time.
Andy, I'm going to ask Roy to comment, but I want to just insert something, and then I know you're very interested.
I'm a godfather. I got
You are. Uh-oh. What have I created here? The letter, just for the people who didn't see the letter, and probably most people in this room didn't see it, but it's and again, we really appreciate the Corps and the other agencies working with the industry on finding solutions. I mean, projects that take this long to get permitted, it's just not consistent with the rule. But some of the recommendations, they said, for example, rather than requiring unanimous consensus of the IRT, you work by majorities, because you're never, oftentimes, you could be the product of the renegade bureaucrat that is never going to agree. So they really had recommended strengthening the, and it sounds to me through training, Andy, like you're trying to do some of that, which is strengthening the leadership of the chair, who is really the key person on that IRT from the Corps, adherence to timelines with discipline. A lot of people that are on the IRT, they just don't get around to replying in a timely way, and it drags out, and they ask for more time. I like the idea of assigning specific review areas to people who have that relevant talent on the IRT and not let everybody be in charge of everything. And then the recommendation to add technology by improving like a technology dashboard that could really keep everybody absolutely up to date on what's taking place in the process. Roy, I'm going to let you comment, then Andy can comment again if he wants, and we're going to get some input.
Sure. I just wanted to say, personally, I'm glad that sort of the getting rid of the IRT is off. That idea is off the table, because if you go back and you take a look at the NRC report, the National Research Council report in 2001, which one of its conclusions was that third-party approaches to mitigation banks, offer advantages over permittee responsible mitigation. Why did the NRC make that conclusion? Part of it had to do with the timing in terms of the provision of mitigation on the ground, but also part of it was the fact that there was, at that time, it was the mitigation banking review team, an interagency process. So I think there's value to that, so long as it's done in an efficient way, and so you do need to have whoever is chairing it actually move the process along and not allow it to be delayed by folks who ask for extensions.
Andy, you want any other comments here?
Yeah, I can appreciate that, and I like that you expanded on the letter that they submitted. There's a lot of good information in there. We also heard that our districts, everyone, regardless of whether you're a sponsor or project manager, whether you work for the Corps or a different agency, you have influence. You are a leader, and you can influence policy and direction. So we need your feedback, and you guys can operate together at the local level. You know what's best for the watershed there. You know how to communicate with each other. You can create local level agreements or standard operating procedures on how to communicate and to hit the timelines. The rule has processes and timelines in it, and I think an electronic tool that you mentioned or something to help manage expectations would be great too, so that all IRT members can see that this needs to happen, good, bad, or otherwise. We need to arrive to a decision. So those are my comments.
Yeah, and you know what it took to put that rule into effect. I mean, I don't even want to think about it again. But the idea of going back and trying to open that up and do it again, if we can make the progress we need to make with the regulatory guidance letter and all of the other steps that you all are taking, it seems to me that we ought to try that first. So for sure. Questions out here?
Yes. The app is working again. So
all right.
We have a couple questions that have come in. The first is for Royal and Aaron. Will your analysis separate out banks, permittee, in-lieu fee that are on public land, or perhaps categorize public land differently, e.g. if on public land, then yes for secured site protection?
Yeah, I think. Yes. Yes, we have the way that we've organized the data allows for that, and so that can be one of the pieces that we explain.
Another quick question for you. Feel free to deflect. Which district was unresponsive to your FOIA requests?
Somebody needs to go check on the Detroit district and make sure that they're okay. We hope to hear from them soon.
And for Andy, are there any plans to prioritize Corps' decision-making on bank and in-lieu fee instruments?
I think we covered some of that.
And one more for you. In the Corps' review of the permit decisions in response to Congress's request, how were permit decisions selected to review, and how large was the sample of decisions?
Yeah, that's a good question. We didn't dive into that in the briefing, but we took 10 decisions each year. So we had 4 that required mitigation banks, 3 that required in-lieu fee, and 3 that went with PRM from each district. So we had 38 districts. We got the group of 10 from each district over 3 years. So we ended up with over 1,200 lines of data to review, and that was something that came to light too in the FOIA. We use the FOIA that the banking industries use, so we're looking at the same data to pull projects from. There's a column in there was mitigation PRM, and it's just a simple yes or no. But when you're filling out that information in our ORM database, it asks that question once. So if you use a combination of bank and PRM, that would reflect as PRM twice on that spreadsheet. So it was given a false impression that PRM was being utilized more than it actually was. So that came to light, and we've already addressed that with our database programmers, and it'll be more clear moving forward whether or not PRM was used on sites. So that was a good question. Yeah, the sample set was large. When we did that, we pulled those 1,200 lines from headquarters. We passed them out to our divisions and districts, and they reviewed work that wasn't in their division and districts. We wanted that degree of separation, right? You don't get to grade your own homework. So that was important to us. We wanted to take an honest, unblinking, hard look in the mirror and see where the wrinkles were. We had a few identified today, so we appreciate that too. But that was the sample set there, and when we have 10% where we look at our own data and we can't say whether or not we justified our decision, that's not good public service. So we're focusing on the 10 and that 4% to get those down and constantly improve what we're doing. Thanks.
Questions out here?
Good afternoon. This is Dave Urban from Ecosystem Investment Partners. Appreciate today's conversation. I think just to tie the line here, the reason we're so interested in timelines is so that we can get more mitigation banks out into the working order so that we can continue to provide the Corps the ability to use mitigation banks as an option. As we all know, the data has shown that increases permitting times and efficiencies. So just to tie the dots of why we're so concerned about timelines. As I've been in this industry for a long time, I appreciate that the issues with the IRTs are a challenge to the Corps, but the thing I'm noticing more and more is that the internal issues of the interaction between Office of Counsel and the regulatory side are a challenge and become more and more of a challenge, and that and even a lot of the regulators I talk to are frustrated by the bottleneck that Office of Counsel provides. And it seems to be that many districts are choosing to allow the Office of Counsel to review more and more pieces of the mitigation banking instruments. And that is adding considerably to timelines. And we just would ask, first of all, some sort of solutions of training to Office of Counsel, some sort of understanding of how Office of Counsel on the regulatory side can work. And just I don't know if you are able to answer that now, but certainly would appreciate folks looking into that issue. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a lot of good points there. The timeline's 3 to 5 years to do something beneficial for the watershed when we can issue permits to build residential developments or big box stores in a year or less. So if you step back and you look at that, it seems kind of sideways. So I can appreciate that and the timelines. We're looking at getting a bunch of infrastructure projects coming through with the funding bill that went through, and we got some additional funding for that. And to imagine $1.1 trillion of projects being filtered through, I think $130 million that we're getting spread over 5 years. Congress has given us the opportunity to show that with additional funding, we can be flexible and adapt and improve our processing of permits. And you bring up a good point that when we do have credits available, our permitting timeframes are cut in half. So that benefits both sides of the equation as far as we're concerned. And it really drives home the importance of having credits available. Prior to this year, with the money we have, we've been flat for 10 years. So you have cost of living increases and inflation, so it's not really flat. You're able to afford less staff. So you have less staff, and big workload, morale's going down, workload's going up. And what can you do to address that? So we appreciate the opportunity that Congress has given us here with this additional funding. And we're looking forward to the challenge. We have this opportunity here, and we don't want to be caught flat-footed, having a bunch of banks out there that have been in review for 3 to 5 years, and now we're holding up infrastructure projects because we don't have credits on the ground. That's not going to fly. So we're aware that it's coming, and we're doing what we can to position ourselves and brace ourselves against the tidal wave.
Andy, we have a timeline-related question online too. Do we need timeframes on sponsors for requests for information or corrections? Are regulators often waiting on sponsors?
That's a good question too. We've got our process. Everyone is familiar with the prospectus and instrument, and draft prospectus and draft instrument. And in between those processes, it's with the sponsor. So if we send a request for information with 10 questions on it, and 3 months later we get 5 of them answered, then we're sending another request with 5 again. So we can be caught in a do loop. I've experienced it personally in some of the projects I've worked on. So communication is a two-way street. getting back to Mr. Woodley's comments last year. So we need responses from the sponsors as quickly as we can, as thorough as they can be too. And we're bureaucrats, right? So we write these letters which may not be able to be understood by everyone. So if you get a letter from us and you read a sentence that's 4 paragraphs long and you don't know what it says, pick up the phone and call us. It's not as hard as a letter can make it. Letter is a pretty inefficient way to communicate. So communication cannot be overstated, and we welcome it frequently. So yeah, it's good that the rule has timelines for us to aim for, and the sponsors are part of the equation too.
Adam Davis with EIP. Thank you very much for the thoughtful and revealing comments about both the analysis of the industry and this work on equivalent standards. Really appreciate it. Just one quick comment about the tidal wave of infrastructure projects coming, and this also goes to equivalency of standards, but credit release schedules and the regal for credit release would be another way to make more credits available for coming infrastructure projects. And I don't know how much analysis has been done on the way in which the 38 districts have responded to that regal for improving or making more consistent the credit release process itself. So I wonder if you could speak to that, I guess Andy in particular. Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question too. That is another mechanism for us getting more credits on the ground sooner. Regal 1901, which sets up kind of front-loading credits and maybe allows for some credits to be released at administrative stages when you secure the site and financial assurances and some other things. So before you're even moving dirt, credits could be released, and that could help drive sponsors to keep the process moving and get the bank going in the ground. I've heard from sponsors that not all districts are embracing that, and that depends what's going on at the district level. You saw from the map that banks aren't everywhere. All the ecoregions are different. And to front load credits or get more credits on the ground sooner, there's a lot that depends on that. You know, the risk that we're accepting, the previous experience we have with that sponsor. Have they produced a productive bank in the past, or are they brand new to the game? What kind of risk are we willing to take? Or if we've had a 7-year experience with them before and we still don't have a bank on the ground. So the sponsor performance, our experience, what's going on in the ecosystem. And yeah, we're strongly encouraging that flexibility to front load credits like that. And that's going to be a big discussion point when we have our mitigation roundtable discussions with districts across the nation, address why some of them are not embracing it and what the issues they're seeing are, and try to tackle those.
Yes, my name is Ali Saleh. I'm from Tarleton State University in Texas, part of A&M system. I'm looking at this whole, by the way, great presentation, all of you. I'm looking at the science part of this. We have a program, for example, that we deliver to USDA for calculating the credit for water quality trading. And I hear the word credit here. Is there any procedure that is being like a program or something to calculate the credit based on the management practices or mitigation strategies happening in the field? And the question for Roy and Aaron is, if you are going to recommend the sort of BMPs or mitigation strategies as part of your production of your project, how do you going to be kind of categorize them? This is better, this is worse, this is, sort of like ranking of this. Is there any kind of calculation or computation that's happening to get that done or not? Thank you.
You want to handle
You-
credits first?
All right, yeah, I'll talk about the credits. There's no standard for credit ratios across the country that whether you're enhancing, restoring, creating, or preserving. They generally get different credits based on the effort that goes into it. If you're preserving something and slapping a conservation easement on it, it takes less effort than trying to restore a site. So that's up to the districts. On on the ratios that they establish and having consistency within their boundaries. But again, nationwide, there's no standards on that.
Roy, you want to comment on that?
Sure. In terms of the best practices, I don't think we were envisioning having sort of a sliding scale, but rather just identifying that what we think are the best practices based on what we've reviewed. But of course, you have to recognize that circumstances differ all across the country. So, we can make these recommendations, and then obviously the folks who are actually implementing it have to decide whether it's fit for purpose in those areas.
And to the extent that there might be differences among the different types of providers, to the extent that we might be able to provide a possible explanation, for example, if it's on public lands, that might help explain why there is a deficiency or a perceived deficiency in that particular category. So to the extent that we have that information and we can sort of slice it up that way, we'll note that. But yeah, I don't think we plan on sort of rank ordering it. But I think broadly, in terms of whether the information is there or not, I think that is something that we can look at and compare, and it appears that there are some differences, and so at a minimum we could suggest that hopefully those are addressed at the regulatory level, but also on the ground as people are preparing the documents and going through the process as well.
Over here. Justin Elkins from the Huntington District Court, and it's maybe for George, Roy, or Aaron. And you've mentioned 3 to 5 years for processing. Have you guys, is there literature or a study that's been done that shows, that delay in the processing and further outlines, where improvements can be made? So that's the first question. And then the second question is related to your initial findings or the study that you're doing, and where you lay out the PRM, and if there's considerations being given that are being driven by either state or local agencies that are requiring certain things to be located in that particular geographic area, and that they require different things that we really don't have control over through that. So are you making those distinctions or caveats when you're looking at that PRM aspect?
So to answer the part about the state and local agencies, I don't think we have that data available. We have looked with PRM, and it's still we're still working through this at sort of the size of the impact to see if that makes a difference. Yeah. With respect to site protection instruments, those are governed by state laws, so there may be some differences there that are driven by state law. We can potentially, I don't know what we'll find, but we can potentially break it up by core district. That is something that we're able to look at to see if there are any notable trends or differences at that level. Right,
and if there's some different state or local requirement, it would have to be above what is required by the feds. So it may be that for some of the PRM, it is being driven by local or state regulation. Aaron noted the variable of the size of impacts for PRM, and so we have taken a look at that. And there is a bit of a correlation if you take a look at the long-term financial mechanism, that where you have permittee responsible mitigation, where there's more than 20 acres of wetland impacts, about 45% at least reference a long-term financial mechanism, but only 10% have an initial funding amount specified. If you bring it all the way down to where there's less than 1 acre of wetland impact, only 11% of those 53, there were 53 permits that had less than 1 acre of wetland impact. 11% at least reference a long-term financial mechanism, but none actually specified an initial funding amount.
So bigger is better.
A little bit,
The,
but 45%.
You know, one of the issues we wrestled with yesterday at the Bankers Forum was this issue of the fact that what we are finding is that in many instances, the amount of money, not the mechanism, not the bond or the whatever it is, but the actual amount of the long-term trust funds are turning out to be woefully inadequate, and in some instances. And it's a big challenge. I mean, I remember when we started in the business, we were generating, 8 to 10% a year return on that trust fund. And then, of course, we saw in recent years that interest rates literally dropped to like nothing. And so to create a long-term trust fund that's going to continue to appreciate in value to stay up with inflation, for example, is a very real challenge aside from the mechanisms you use to implement it. So you have any thoughts on that as part of your research? Is that not kind of something else that's coming to surface?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And so part of best practices would be to take into account inflation and to actually articulate what the expected rate of return would be. With respect to PRM, only 3% of the 270 projects that we looked at, the documentation actually referenced considering inflation and specified a rate of return. One way perhaps to deal with this, some districts have a delayed spend or an interim management period that allow the endowment to grow. So we see that with some mitigation banks, and that may be one of the things we recommend.
Other questions?
We have an online question. There was talk about empowering PMs to make decisions. However, in some districts, PMs do not have decision-making authority. Has HQ looked at district-level decision-making authority delegation levels compared with meeting mitigation rule timelines?
No, we haven't. The decision-making authority lies with the district engineer, so they get to determine
We'll wind it down.
the appropriate level of signature delegation. And the PM may not have the level of authority to approve a mitigation bank instrument, but they may have the ability to sign for certain steps throughout the process. And my experience in the districts I've been at is you come into the district, and as you would expect, you're given very little, and you earn it, and they let out some more slack on the line, and you earn more signature delegation. So signature delegation is a topic that's decided at the district level. I did want to touch a little bit on what Justin said about identifying bottlenecks. I've talked to Karen, our ORM program person, and about the potential for having more data the timelines being requested in ORM for when things are happening. If we send out a request for information and we don't hear back for 4 months, that's not being captured right now. So we can't provide any data to that either. And it doesn't do any good to say, you're not responding, and they're saying, well, you're not responding, and we need to figure it out. And I think ORM offers us a potential to try to put some actual data to that discussion. And I wanted to mention that I really appreciate, not everyone may know it, but the banking associations here are extremely active on the Hill. And they've heard us talk for the last decade about budget, and they're on the Hill saying the same thing to congressional staffers and everyone else up there, that the Corps needs more money. We need to keep things moving. What can we do to help? So that was the impetus for getting the extra money for shellfish permitting, which had the supposition in there that we weren't following the rule. So that made us take a good look in the mirror, and we really appreciate that. So
Andy, we've been talking about it for a long time. I've told this joke before, but it's worth repeating. I served as a county commissioner, and during a time when South Florida was experiencing a lot of growth, still is. And so we had to expand our staff in order to process permits. And to do that, we raised the application fees, okay, and use those fees to hire more people, or in some cases to outsource the permitting. And so I, at one point a few years ago, asked the question, because this is an ongoing challenge, has been, getting funding for the Corps to have the staff, and keeping the staff and training the staff, and then making sure they're well paid and they stay. When I raised the question, why don't you do what local government does, and state governments do the same thing, I was told, well, we can't do that. That would require an act of Congress, which I thought was, whoa. You know, so you don't have the flexibility that we have at the local level. It'd be nice if you had some of that flexibility. I mean, it's good to get the funding for your staff, to add the additional staff people into the training and everything else that goes with it. But to also maybe have some flexibility in the process to be able to, you know, when all of a sudden, you know, 3 people quit, or, you know, and so on and so forth, and there's a pile of applications that are just sitting there and they're not getting moved. That's a challenge for you guys, I know. So, but the old, like, act of Congress.
Yeah, that's a good point. And even though we can't collect the fees for permits like that, you know, we do have around 1,100 regulators across the nation. So a big push that we're doing with these IIJA funds is being coined as like regulators without borders. So you're not stuck. If a district has 10 people and 2 walk out to go do something else, they're firing at 80% capacity. There's a lot of work that we can do across borders as far as evaluating banks or ILF documents. We don't need to be directly there to be boots on the ground. The local folks could do whatever site visits need to be done, and someone else could be working on the administrative side of things. So we are trying to be as flexible as we can with the staff.
Well, great. I want to thank our panel here, and I hope you will too, by giving them a round of applause. And again, we all want to thank Carlene and her staff for doing such a terrific job. And with that said, thank you all, and we'll see you at the bar.
Well, not yet. We've got another Eventually.